what they went through. Ask them this any day, and them elders sure to say. Black man got to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. Make up your mind to work 10 times harder to get something because of your color. Black man got to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. People rob you, humiliate you, turn around and whip you, and then they free you. Black man got to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. So when you're here, you get a little something. With a more high friends, look your back in because you don't know already. Black man don't get nothing easy. You get up one morning, and oil money running. How it come you don't know. You don't care how the thing go. But if you read about Uriah, you go find out about the pressure. How they get so much whole hell. Get a penny from PLL. Black man got to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. You got to take up your own cash money. Pay people for your own refinery. Black man got to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. Make up your mind to be a magician, to make money out of scrap iron. Black man got to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. So when you're here, you get a little something. With a dragon and you keep marking. Because I don't tell you already. Black man don't get nothing easy.
There could never become a day when our debt to the country that we can repeat. And I mean, somebody write a whole thesis on just them 2 lines. And I always wanted to, if you give me the opportunity to sing for you, I just want to make a difference in your life. It shouldn't be just about we have a drink and we dance. When I leave you, then you should say, but darling, tell me something here tonight. I have to tell my daughter.
You get up one morning, your elders have something. You don't know how they get it, but you want to use it. But if you ask them old people, you get the thing what they went through. Ask them this any day, and them elders sure to say. Black man got to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. Make up your mind to work 10 times harder to get something because of your color. Black man got to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. People rob you, humiliate you, turn around and whip you, and then they free you. Black man got to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. So when you're here, you get a little something. With a more high friends, look your back in because you don't know already. Black man don't get nothing easy. You get up one morning, and oil money running. How it come you don't know. You don't care how the thing go. But if you read about Uriah, you go find out about the pressure. How they get so much whole hell. Get a penny from PLL. Black man got to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. You got to take up your own cash money. Pay people for your own refinery. Black man got to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. Make up your mind to be a magician, to make money out of scrap iron. Black man got to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. So when you're here, you get a little something. With a dragon and you keep marking. Because I don't tell you already. Black man don't get nothing easy. You get up one morning, independence happening. You think the thing come easy, you start taking liberty. But if you know about petition, we had to send to England for some woman to tell we in this colony free. Black man have to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. You got to go to conference in London to get independence in your own land. Black man black man to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. If they enslave you, and then they whip you, turn wrong and sell you, and then they free you. Black man got to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. So when you're here, you get a little something. With a dragon and you keep marking. Because you don't know this already. Black man don't get freedom easy. So you got to start thinking. You get it easy. You got to practice economy. From getting licks from the slave master to become the landowner. It's a terrible journey. Black with plenty brutality. Black man got to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. You got to make up your mind that you're able to get a money and jam with the devil. Black man got to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. You got to make up your mind that you're ready to swim on shore and rock your boat steady. Black man got to keep on jamming. For black man to get a little something. So when you're here, you get a little something. With a hope, you better keep watching. Because I don't tell you already. Black man don't get nothing easy. Black man got to keep on jamming. Black man to get a little something. You got to put your paparazzi in England to get independence in your own land. Black man got to keep on jamming. Make up your mind, brother, that you're able to get a bully and fight down the devil.
Stalin to Calypso.
Hey, good evening to you. Good evening to you. Welcome to Politics 101. The Politics 101. The black man himself, Black Stalin, Dr. Leroy Calise. A little bit more of him tonight to start us off. Black man don't get nothing easy. You got to make up your mind to tumble with the devil, not to fight on the side of the devil. Black man don't get nothing easy. The story of African people, the story of African people is a unique story. It's a unique story, and it's a unique story. And some people would like us to forget that story. Black man don't get nothing easy. You wake up one morning, oil money come in. I love the griot. I love the poet. I love the Calypsonian. Storytelling. Good evening to you, and it's a Thursday evening. A Thursday evening we're coming to you. Our topic tonight is quite interesting. Quite interesting. The PPP regime is 1,000,000 times worse than the Burnham regime. Yay, 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 yay. We're doing consciousness raising. Some of us are in the present. Some of us are here right now. But the thing about this kind of stuff is that when we finish here tonight, you can share it to others. We're doing some consciousness raising. One of the things that came home to us very, 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 very clearly these past couple of weeks and in the wake of the so-called local government elections was the need for African consciousness, Black consciousness. There is need for Indian consciousness too, and Amerindian consciousness. We need consciousness. People have to be conscious about what they're dealing with. When you are dealing with the type of regime that you're dealing with, you need a sense of, you need a consciousness of what you're dealing with. And part of the problem is that we don't have a consciousness of what we're dealing with. We are locked into the present. And we have a certain one-track interpretation of the past. We're locked into Guyana and believe that we are the world. We are the only people in the world. But we are part of a region. We are part of a hemisphere. We are part of a world. We are part of the African diaspora also. We tell our story so that we can become conscious of who we are. When we talk about the black man, we are also talking about the brown man, the Indian man, the Amerindian woman, the Portuguese woman, the Chinese man. We are talking about all Guyanese. Some people think that when we talk about the black man or the black woman, we are being parochial. But we are not. There are stories to be learned. Black man don't get nothing easy. And there's a reason why black man don't get nothing easy. Because the black man is always the fly in the ointment. The black man has a story. The black woman has a story to tell that no other ethnic group in Guyana could tell because they were not part of that story. We have a story to tell to save humanity. Black man don't get nothing easy. This is to say that some people do get some things easy. The working class man or the working class woman don't get nothing easy. The working class man or woman of any race, any ethnicity, don't get nothing easy. But if they want to know, there is something that the black man, the black woman can teach the working class of all races, all groups, to get yourself, get your ass whipped for work, to work for nothing. We can tell that story. We can tell that story. We live that story. No chains around my feet, but I am not free, says Robert Nesta Marley. We can tell that story. There's something that we have to teach the working class. What it is to have your humanity ripped away from you and you fight every day, every single day. What it is to be human, what it is to be a human being. We're going to put some consciousness, and when we become conscious, the entire Guyana will become conscious. We got to begin to talk some truth. Whether we like it or not, we're going to ruffle some feathers in the coming days and the coming weeks and the coming months, because we're going to get this consciousness right. What it is to be human, what it is to be thrown crumbs and to throw bones. To be treated as non-humans. And then people want to tell us, no man, you're normal. They want to tell us we're angry men and we're angry women. We're going to do some consciousness. You know, we can't get the story right in Guyana. We're in the presence of the most degenerate government that we have seen in Guyana and across the English-speaking Caribbean in our post-independence era. And it may sound outlandish to some people because there's nothing to compare the present to. And so the present looks normal. But the present is not normal. This is the most dangerous government that we have experienced since independence. And we have seen danger since independence. We've seen a lot of danger, but this is the most dangerous government. And we're going to do some consciousness raising. And I'm going to make some bad friends and maybe some good friends. One of the reasons we're not able to tell the story, the real story about this government, is because we don't want to be honest, you know? In order to tell the real story of this regime, we have to be honest about past regimes. And I'm going to be honest. This regime is the most degenerate. And if we do not stop it, if we do not stop this regime, we will be back on the plantation. And when we go back on the plantation, African people will be there. We will be at the bottom of the plantation, but Indian people and Amerindian people will be in that plantation too. There will be a little bit above. There'll be the house slaves. There ain't going to be no more house slaves for black people. We'll be. So this storytelling and this consciousness raising is for them too. You see? When the PNC was in power under Burnham, they did some bad things. And we have to admit those bad things. I know if you're PNC, you don't want to say, well, under Burnham, they did bad things. But you see, if you don't say that and you don't put that on the table, you can't point your finger at the worst things that the PPP is doing. You first of all have to admit that under Burnham, they did some bad things. But I'm telling you, as someone who lived through the Burnham years, not just lived through it, but someone who fought against it, I can tell you that what these are doing is 1,000,000 times worse. But we have to start first by admitting, Mr. PNC people and Mr. Black man, that when your government was in there, they did some bad things. You have to clear that away. You have to admit that. You have to admit your bad things in order to point to the worst things of this government. And that's one of the problems that we black people have. Because, yeah, Burnham did some good things. And we can talk about that easily. But it's difficult to say Burnham did some bad things. But in order to understand how terrible things are today, you got to start by saying, when we were doing there, we do some bad things. You know, we don't like to hear when the young black people tell we that when the coalition was there, they did nothing for we. We don't like to hear that. But there is more than a kernel of truth in that. And we have to face that. Going into the 2020 elections, my party put a proposal to the coalition, our coalition partners. We said, go out there and tell black people you're sorry. Tell them, look, when we had power, there are things we could have done differently. There is more that we could have done for you. And we apologize for not doing more. We begged them to do it, and they didn't do it. They felt it was a sign of weakness to go and apologize to your own people. And it was one of the biggest mistakes, because your own people now are turning back. When they're opportunistically going after the crumbs from the other side, they're turning back and telling you, you didn't do nothing for me. And you apologize to them. And tell them we didn't do enough. We made errors. I had a government minister, former government minister on this program a couple of weeks ago. I love her, but I asked her, is there anything, sister, that when you were back there in power, when you were a minister, is there anything now looking back that you could have done differently? And she didn't answer the question. She didn't say, you know, when I look back as Minister of Housing, I could have given more house lots to our supporters. That was too much to come out of our mouth. But we have to admit that when we had power in our hands for 5 years, we did things for all Guyanese, including Africans. We did. Nobody is saying that. I have said that the coalition government was the first government in our post-colonial history that did not, as a matter of policy, they did not infringe on the civil rights and the civil liberties of Guyanese. And that's a big stretch for me to say that, but it is true. Did they infringe on the rights of individuals? Yes, they did. All governments in Guyana's history have done so, including the coalition government. But there was no consistency of infringing human rights and human dignity under the coalition government. I could say that. And the coalition government, let me tell you, I have the scars to show. I was appointed to a ministry under the coalition government to work to help them in that ministry, to put my expertise to work. I lasted 3 months. I was knocked off. I wasn't given a letter of dismissal. Nobody called me and said you were knocked off. I was just knocked off. Why? Because when the government gave itself ministers and all of them a 50% raise, I said, no, you're wrong. No, David, you're wrong. They didn't wait to hear more from me. They knocked me off. And I understand one of them, or the person who knocked me off, said that he or she who paid the piper must call the song. Knocked me off. I had a second assignment at the Chronicle. And I did 2 things at the Chronicle. I wrote a column of the Chronicle every Sunday. And then I wrote editorials. Editorials are really the policy. It's a column in every newspaper every day that says, this is the policy of the newspaper on this issue. And I wrote those. So on a Sunday, I would write my column, which was my own view. And then I would write the editorial, which was the view of the newspaper. And I felt I was going to do 2 things with that Chronicle assignment. One, I was going to support a government that I campaigned for, and for all intents and purposes, I was part of, because my party was part of the coalition. And I was going to support that government. I was going to write in support of that government. So whatever the editor wants me to write, within reason, I would write, or sometimes I came up with my own initiative of what the policy, what the statement of the paper should be on that given Sunday. And 9 out of the 10 times, I wrote in support of the government. And then in my own column, I critiqued the government. Some Sundays, I praised the government. Other Sundays, I was critical of the government. I felt I could do 2 things. I could support the government in the editorials that I write, and I could be critical of the government when it went wrong in my column. They knocked me off. And when I asked the editor, do you want me to continue writing editorials? He said yes. They had no problems with me writing in praise of them. But they didn't want me to be critical of them. I felt I could do both. And I felt I should do both. I hear people say whichever party is in power, the Chronicle is the same. I want to tell them that between 2015 and 2018, when Lincoln Lewis and I were knocked off from the Chronicle was different. The Chronicle supported the government of the day, and the Chronicle, through David Hines and Lincoln Lewis, was critical of the government. People forget those 3 years. But we were knocked off. After a year or so, I went back and I continued to write editorials for them. My column didn't, I didn't resume my column, but I continued to write editorials for them. Although they knocked me off 2 times. So I have no, I have no reason to be overly biased towards the coalition government. I have no reason. It didn't matter to me much, my personal persecution by the coalition government. I'm saying that they made a difference because that government did not violate human rights and human dignity systematically, although they violated my right, my individual right. As an individual, they violated my right to free speech. But I think in total, they did a better job than other governments. How much more objective than that one can be? So I don't have any reason to love the coalition government based on what they did to me, but I am speaking the truth. During the Burnham government, I was a political prisoner for 3 years and 3 months. Suffered personally under the black government of Burnham. I suffered personally under the black government of Granger. So when people are saying David Hines is a racist and David Hines fought black governments and he suffered under them. But I'm not walking around with that on my shoulder and allowing that to blind me from seeing what this government didn't lock me up. PPP never locked me up. The PPP never knocked me out from a job because they never give me one in the first place. So I am not allowing my personal hurt by PNC governments, black government, to blind me to what this Indian government is doing that is 1,000,000 times worse than what those governments did. One, sometimes it's difficult. I know it's difficult to separate your personal hurt and allow yourself to see the big picture. I am not saying I'm perfect in that regard, but I struggle every day to do that. I know people, colleagues of mine, who cannot get over what Burnham and the PNC did to them. They did terrible things to them, jailed them. All of us had to look around and see our leader being assassinated by the PNC, killed Walter Rodney. It's hard to go through all of that and not have a personal thing against the PNC. But I'm saying at my level, I struggle with that. And I'll be a fool if I don't say that there is some personal hurt that is still there. But I do not make that personal hurt dictate how I see the present. That's the point I want to get at tonight. I am breaking publicly with those who allow themselves to be blinded by their personal hurt on the Burnham and Granger. Allow themselves to be blinded by that so that they cannot see how terrible this government is, the present government, how 1,000,000 times worse they are. I am breaking with that group. And that group includes Africans, it includes Indians. There are Indian activists today, good people, who cannot see rigging of elections under the PPP because they're so consumed and convinced that rigging occurred under the PNC, and the PNC has a corner on rigging. And they're so consumed by their hurt under the PNC that they can't see how this present government is rigging 1,000,000 times worse than Burnham ever did. I am breaking with that group. I think it's immoral to continue to deny the Guyanese people the real truth about what they're facing because you are personally hurt. And as I said at the beginning, if you're a PNC supporter, you have to come to grips that your party, your leader, your idol, Burnham, did some bad things. And when you come to grips with that, you will then understand how worse these people here now are. Burnham rigged elections. Stop quibbling about that. I hear some black people say, well, Burnham didn't really, well, nonsense, he rigged elections. But we see the rigging that is taking place today is so scientific and so brazen that nothing Burnham did in terms of rigged election can match up to what these people are doing. There were assassinations under Burnham. Whether Burnham knew or didn't know, they happened under him. Rodney, Father Dark, Ohini Kwamo, Edward Dublin, the ballot box martyrs in 1973, all of those happened under Burnham. They were what we call selective assassinations. But you come under the PPP, you had mass assassinations. They say 400 black men, they say PPP says not 400. Well, whether it's 4 or 40 or 400, there were mass assassinations. They didn't assassinate a Walter Rodney, but they assassinate many versions of Walter Rodney. Crummy Wing. Waddle, those are the better known ones. The hundreds of young black men, mass political assassinations. Burnham did selective assassinations. The PPP took it to a fascist level. I hear my brothers Ravi Dev and them talk about the Wisma massacre of 1964. What about the hundreds of black men? Wasn't that massacre too? And these men were murdered not just as men, they were murdered as black men. Let's get real. I am breaking with those who continue to muzzle themselves because they suffer personal and political hurt under Burnham and Granger. And so it blinds them that they can't see the danger of this present regime. I am not blinded by that, and I break with that group on this question. People are prepared to talk about how Burnham rigged the election and can't open their mouth to say anything about the rigged elections in front of us. The election on Wednesday, on Monday there was so rigged, where a government took billions of dollars of our own money to rig an election in front of us by buying votes in front of our very faces. It's the worst and most immoral form of rigging. Under Burnham, they voted multiple times. Under the PPP, they're commandeered to vote against their own will. They're bought. They're dehumanized. The rigging today is worse than under Burnham. It is not just rigging, it is barefaced rigging, and in the process it reduces the citizen to a slave. Burnham never did that. I'm saying to you all PNC people, you all gonna vex with me, but I'm saying in order for you all to really tell the real story of this government, you all have to admit the failures and the bad things of your own governments. We fought Burnham on something called paramountcy of the party, where the party was above the government and the state. The worst form of paramountcy we have today. It is not just the party above the government and the state. It is the party barefacedly instructing the government and the state, the president calling and saying who should be promoted and who should not be promoted. We fought Burnham on maximum leadership, one-man leadership. What Jack Dio is doing is 1,000,000 times worse than what Burnham did at that level. Burnham was a maximum leader. He was a one-man leader. But I said he listened. Jack Dio is not the president officially, but he acts like the president. The Constitution says Jack Dio should have 2 terms. Take your 2 terms and go along your way. No, the man is back there now in a 3rd term. Burnham never did that. The things we see this government is doing, what they criticize Burnham for doing, they're doing it and doing it worse. And I'm calling out people like Donald Ramatar and Gail Teixeira and Clement Roy who know better and who I know don't like the nonsense that these little boys are doing. These little short-tail boys are doing. They know. But because of party loyalty, they're saying nothing. These little boys have banished them, banished Roy. Bring you out to retirement, retired him, and bring him out to retirement to go and do GCOM work, Jankilar work. Take away ministry work from him and tell him now go and do Jankilar work. He knows better. They treat Ramata like nothing. Their own stalwarts. But their own stalwarts remain quiet because of party loyalty. That is part of what is hurting Guyana. This is a runaway train we had. Burnham was not a runaway train. Let me explain to you all. Burnham's overreach was challenged from day one by the PPP. They were on Burnham's tail. They use rice, they use sugar, they use their position and their influence in the business sector to squeeze Burnham's balls. And black people, some of us, black people, we were on Burnham's tail, starting in the 60s with Ascria, coming right through to the WPA. Burnham was not a runaway train because the opposition to Burnham came from Africans and Indians. This here is a runaway train because the Indians have done tools and allowing this government to do what it likes. And Africans, they have not necessarily done tools, but many of their leaders, including those in the PNC, have allowed themselves to be muzzled. And so this government doesn't have the kind of resistance to fight back against as Burnham did. Burnham, yes, he was authoritarian, but he was not a runaway train because there was resistance to him. We are allowing this PPP to be a runaway train because Indians have done tools and black people making themselves a fool. This regime is 1,000,000 times worse than Burnham. We fought against Burnham. We fought against his one-man rule. We fought against his authoritarianism. We fought against his paramountcy of the party. One of the things that we couldn't accuse him of was wholesale and widespread racism against Indians. There may have been racist people in the PNC, but as a government, perhaps because the Burnham government rigged elections, they felt they had to compensate Indians in another way. And they bent over backwards not to appear to use the government to discriminate against Indians in a direct way. Were Indians discriminated against? Obviously they were. You have a black government. That is competing with an Indian party. Yes, Indians were discriminated against, but I am saying that discrimination was not systemic. The discrimination against Africans that we see from the PPP today is systemic. Burnham never went into Indian communities and systematically demolished their homes. Yes, there were demolition of people's homes in 1973, the Land for the Landless campaign. Yes, there was that. But the systemic going into Port Morant and Enmore and Enterprise and bulldozing their homes, Burnham did not commit that crime. We see that crime being committed by this government. This government is 1,000,000 times worse than Burnham. When it comes to racial discrimination against the other group, Burnham is going to get a passing grade. He may not get an A, But if you get a passing grade, this government will not even make an F. It will be a 0. The way it treats and discriminates against the opposite group. Come on, let's talk tonight. Because we are doing consciousness raising. I am breaking with those progressives on my side who allow their personal hurt and political hurt under Burnham to cloud and to blind them. They're so consumed with hatred of the PNC that they can't see the damage that the PPP is doing to us with their very eyes. I break with them publicly tonight. I was hurt too, as I explained. But it is immoral to allow your personal and political hurt to so blind you. Every time you hear the PNC, you get in a tizzy and you prefer to allow the PPP to get a pass, to do the look. Allow the PPP to damage our country. Many of them were quick to say what they saw Mingo doing. And you push 4,000 votes in front of them. 4,000 people who voted who were not here and they didn't see it yet. You push 47 boxes without statutory documents in front of them and they didn't see it yet. But they see a piece of old cloth. Mingo, that's all they saw. That's all they saw. They watched the PPP take advantage of black people, beat black people, literally beat them, put the police to beat up black people. And they still didn't see it. Burnham never sent the police into Indian communities to systematically beat up Indians. Yes. The PPP beat, under the PNC, the police beat all we. In fact, in the black community, they beat us more than they beat Indians. Burnham never used the police and the army to systematically beat up Indians. Yes, there was Indian fear of the police and the army, and quite rightly so. And there were instances where the police participated in some bad things. They kicked down the door thing where the police joined with bandits in the 1980s to be kicking down Indian people door and so on, money Indians. And the first person to speak out against that was the UC Kwayana, a black man. So I'm not saying the police didn't do things to Indian people, but they never went into the Indian communities in a systematic way and beat up Indians in the way that this government has used the police to go into African villages and to beat up them. Look at what the police has done this is only from 2020 to 2023. From Boston to Quindon Bacchus to Peter Headley and others. Under Burnham, the police did not go into Indian villages and kill Indian people in their sleep and target Indian young men. Did Indian young men die at the hands of the police under the PNC? Yes. But I'm talking about a systematic use of the police against the citizens of the opposite ethnic group. Burnham didn't do that. I'm going to talk some truth tonight and the following nights. I know you're all accustomed to me bringing on guests, and I will continue to bring my guests on. But I'm going to talk more than I did before, because I think this consciousness is needed. Because the PPP goes around and talks about Burnham this and Burnham that and Burnham this, and they've packed that into Indian people's heads. And some young black people who didn't live through that period, they themselves have become vulnerable to that kind of propaganda. And it takes people like myself who suffered under Burnham personally and politically to talk the truth. And I'm going to talk the truth. And this truth is not just for black people, it's also for Indian people and Amerindian people. I want Indian comrades who are listening, Indian young people, to listen to this program and to hear me. I'm not a PNC lover. I repeat, I suffered under the PNC more than some of these Indian brethren who are lambasting Burnham, and they never went to jail under Burnham. They never see the inside of a cell under Burnham. And they walk around the place and talk about Burnham bad. I suffered under Burnham. I know what it is to be jailed. So when I speak with an authenticity that some of them don't have. We're doing consciousness raising. We want our people to be conscious. I'm not sitting up here and say Burnham didn't do bad things. He did bad things. He was part of that generation of Caribbean leaders and African leaders and Latin American leaders who did some bad things. Those of you young people who like to read, there's a book written by Clive Thomas called The Rise of the Authoritarian State in the Periphery. The Rise of the Authoritarian State in the Periphery. Written in 1984 by Clive Thomas, or on Clive Thomas. Those of you young people and not so young who like to read, go and read that book and you will see the rise of the authoritarian state after independence. It was a real thing in Guyana, the Caribbean, Africa, Latin America, and Asia. And Burnham was part of that. It's a dilemma. Burnham used the state to lift poor people of all races. Indians, Amerindians, black people. The first leader to give Indian holidays, it wasn't the PPP government or Jagan, it was Burnham. Burnham made accommodations with external forces, but at least he nationalized our bauxite and our sugar. This present government is not just making accommodation with external forces, it's defending external forces. Burnham would never go to court and appeal a decision of his court against an external company. He never did it. Let me take back and say he would never, but he never did it. He never defended an external force against a ruling of his own court. He never did it. We live to see it under this regime. It's 1,000,000 times worse than Burnham. Hear me tonight. Burnham never appealed a case for an external company against a ruling of his own court. This PPP regime has done it. some of those who don't know better, oh, David Hines is what? Resuscitating Burnham, or whatever word they use. David Hines is talking the truth. Burnham had revolutionary policies. All of them did. Manley, Gary, all of them. They had revolutionary policies as far as using the state to lift poor people. But the price we had to pay for it was their excesses. And Burnham had a lot of excesses. But those excesses by Burnham have been overrun 1,000,000 times by this government, this present government. This present government is dangerous, and it is holding us back. Right back to the plantation. One Guyana is the new mantra for one plantation. One plantation with some people at the top, some people at the middle, and black people at the bottom. Because Guyana is a plantation right now. That's what it is. But Guyana is the new Dubai, and Guyana is the new slave plantation in our Caribbean. Only on the slave plantation you send trucks into the slave quarters, because that's what they consider black communities, slave quarters. And you send the police and machines to demolish the homes of those who you dub as your slaves. Burnham never had slaves. Burnham never cultivated slaves. The PPP government is cultivating slaves. Burnham never cultivated slave catchers. Those big strapping men in Linden who are standing up there and selling their daughters and their sons to the slave master for him to rape them. That's what they did on Monday. That's what they did on Monday. Some black people, they sold their sons and their daughters to be raped by the modern day slave masters. Burnham never encouraged that. He never encouraged that. A black man would never do that under Burnham. There were black men who opposed Burnham like myself, but we never sold our people to slave masters. Under the PPP, they're cultivating slave masters and slave catchers. I want you all to hear me out tonight, and hear me out in the coming nights, because I'm speaking some truth, because we got a lot of consciousness to do, and I want you all to share these. If you all like what I'm saying and believe what I'm saying, share it wide. Let your children listen to it, because they must know the truth. They use Walter Rodney, turn him into a Negro. And when they finish with him, they dump him in the black pit that they dug for all of us. On his 43rd anniversary, their mouthpieces say that he was anti-Indian. They used us in pursuit of their narrow ends. Sisters and brothers, there's a time and place for everything. There's a season for everything. And in this season, we are called upon to do some of this evangelical work, as the Christians may call it. Because it's very important work. We've got to save our young people, all those hundreds of thousands of young people, young Africans, young Indians, who have been led astray by this government. This government don't mind employing Black young people to clean trenches. There's dignity in labor. I'm not saying that some of us don't have to clean the trenches. There's dignity in labor. I've grown up in a village and I see people cleaning trenches. Dignity in labor. We must not only be useful to clean trenches, but we must be useful to own the boats that ride in the water. I'm not going to stop, because I'm tired of it. I'm tired of good people who struggled through the years, who struggled against Burnham, but they allow themselves to be consumed by hatred of Burnham, that they're allowing them who are worse than Burnham to pass. I break with them tonight on this issue. And I said a couple of weeks ago, even if I have to walk alone, I will walk alone. I will walk alone. I will walk alone. We are still debating what happened on Monday, the elections and all of that. And there's a lot of introspection to be done. And political parties will do their political party introspection. They will reduce it to how many seats they lost and how many seats they win and who made inroads and who don't make inroads. There's that kind of work to be done. I am, that is useful work too. But the more useful work to be done is to stop the confounded nonsense that the PPP is going on with. That is what we have to stop. My position on the elections were very clear. I stand with my party's position not to participate in ungodly elections. But when I saw what the PPP was doing, when I saw them going for the heart and the soul of unsuspecting Black people, I had to say to Black people, as I did, go out and use your vote as a sharp blade, a flashing blade against them. Go out and use your vote as a weapon. You all heard me on this program saying it. And it was that weapon, that flashing blade that you used that caused Georgetown and Linden and New Amsterdam not to be snatched away as part of the bounty by the PPP. Some people on my side are going to be critical of me for that. I'm prepared to bear that criticism. That in an hour of need, I did not stand with the bouncers at the door. I did not stand with those who were herding our people from the heartland of Africa to those dungeons of no return onto the slave ship. Sometimes political scores should not be settled I know many people are saying, well, Dr. Hines, step up and be a leader and and all of that. Yes. I belong to a political party. And I know at a certain level the PNC, they're upon nonsense. I've said that publicly, and I will say to them privately when I meet them, they're upon nonsense. They're upon stupidness, the PNC leadership. I say it publicly, I'm going to say it privately. The energy that they take to be fighting among themselves, they should be fighting the PPP. They're fighting for prize in their party, and they're allowing the big prize to go by the depth and stupidness. And yes, those of you who feel the depth and stupidness and want to come on my side, you're welcome. You're welcome. I welcome you. We welcome you. And if some of you think that I have a leading role to play, if that is assigned to me, I'm going to embrace that role. But I am not settling political scores and trying to outpace and outmaneuver and outcompete with the PNC. While the PPP is running away with this country. I want to outmaneuver, outcompete, outpace the PPP, not the PNC. If I have to compete with the PNC, so be it. We will compete with each other. Because if the PNC depends on stupidness, some of us have to say, well, if they depend on stupidness, come on our side. I have no problem in saying that. But I am not competing with the PNC at this particular juncture, when the competition should be with the PPP. In other words, what I'm saying, if I'm firing at the PNC, it's friendly fire, because they are our friends right now. And if I'm firing as I must at the PPP, it's not friendly fire. I'm repeating it. If I'm firing at the PNC, as I have been doing, it's friendly fire. I'm not allowing no hurt of what Burnham did to me to recognize that the PNC today is not the identical PNC of Burnham time. The PNC today is in the dungeons just like me. And when you look around a dungeon and you see people like you, don't ask, were you a Burnhamite? Are you a Burnhamite? We hold hands and try to get out of the dungeon. So we are a diverse people. We in the opposition are diverse. Those of you who feel the PNC upon stupidness and they're nothing, come over to us. Come to us. But no, you're not coming to us, certainly from my standpoint, so that we can deliver you to the PPP slave masters. There we are. Let the words of our mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight. Here tonight. And we're going to continue tomorrow night on this theme. The present PPP regime is 1,000,000 times worse than the Burnham regime. Burnham has turned out to be a little schoolboy when it comes to dictatorship when compared with the PPP.